Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back a very long way indeed, back across more than 2,000 years, to the ancient worlds of Greece and Rome, to the marble temples and the crowded cities, the philosophers and the emperors, the everyday lives of ordinary people in a world both dazzling and strange. And we are going to explore a curious and fascinating thing about those ancient worlds. The many customs and practices and attitudes that were entirely ordinary and unremarkable to the Greeks and Romans, woven into the fabric of their everyday lives, and that seem, to us who look back across the long centuries, genuinely strange and sometimes disturbing. Before you settle in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from in the world and what time it is. It's always 2 a.m. somewhere, and I find it comforting to imagine all of us lying awake in the dark together and drifting back through the centuries. And if this channel helps carry you off to sleep, tap the like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure at all. I will be here regardless, talking quietly in the dark about the long, strange history of how people used to live. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for some sweet background hum, and get comfortable, because we have a long and gentle journey ahead of us tonight, back across more than 2,000 years to the ancient shores of the Mediterranean, and you do not need to remember any of it. All right, let's begin. Have you ever wondered what daily life was really like in ancient Greece and Rome, beneath the marble and the myth, in the ordinary homes and streets and marketplaces? Have you ever wondered what those ancient people took entirely for granted that would astonish us today, what customs and attitudes were, to them, so normal as to pass without a second thought? Have you ever wondered how differently people once understood the world, the body, the household, the gods, and one another? These are the things we are going to drift through tonight, slowly and gently, in the dark, the strange and fascinating, and sometimes disturbing ordinariness of the ancient world. So settle back, let your eyes grow heavy, and let us travel together, softly, across the centuries, to the sunlit and shadowed world of Greece and Rome. Let us begin, gently, with the very idea we have already touched upon, the strange and shifting nature of what any age considers normal. Before we wander into the particular customs of the ancient world, let us pause a moment on the curious idea that lies at the heart of our journey tonight, the strange and shifting nature of what is considered normal. For it is one of the most fascinating things about human history, and one of the gentlest to contemplate in the quiet of the night, that so much of what any people takes for granted, what seems to them simply the natural and obvious way of things, is in truth particular to their own time and place, and would seem strange indeed to those who came before or after. The Greeks and Romans did not think of their customs as strange or disturbing, any more than we think of our own. To them, the arrangements of their world were simply how things were, the natural order of life, unremarkable and unquestioned, woven so deeply into the fabric of their days that they scarcely noticed them at all. The things we will explore tonight, which may strike us as odd or unsettling, were to them the ordinary furniture of existence, no more remarkable than the streets they walked or the bread they ate. This is the first and most important thing to understand, that we are not looking at a world that thought itself strange, but at a world that thought itself entirely normal, and that would have found much in our own lives just as strange as we find in theirs. For it works in both directions, this strangeness, and that is part of what makes it so gentle and so fascinating to consider. Just as many of their customs would astonish us, so many of ours would astonish them. They would find our world as full of oddities as we find theirs, our habits and assumptions and arrangements as peculiar and inexplicable as any of the things we will wander through tonight. The strangeness is not a matter of them being odd and us being normal, but of the vast gulf of time and change that separates us, across which each age appears strange to the other. We are all, in the end, creatures of our own time, wrapped in the customs we happen to have been born into, and blind to how particular and how strange they truly are. And there is something genuinely soothing in this thought, something that softens all the strangeness we will explore and holds it at a gentle distance. For if the disturbing things we will touch upon tonight were, to those who practiced them, simply normal, then they were not the acts of monsters but of ordinary human beings, living within the assumptions of their age, as we live within ours. This does not excuse the genuine darknesses of the ancient world, and we will not pretend that it does. But it does allow us to look upon them with a kind of calm understanding rather than horror, to see them as the products of a particular time and its particular blindnesses, and to feel, across the centuries, not revulsion, but a quiet and thoughtful recognition of our shared and imperfect humanity. It is worth dwelling for a moment on just how completely this works, how invisible our own assumptions are to us. We do not, as we go about our days, experience our customs as choices or as one possibility among many. We experience them simply as reality, as the way things are, no more to be questioned than the ground beneath our feet. The ancient Greek or Roman experienced their own world in exactly the same way, not as a set of strange practices but simply as life itself, unremarkable and obvious. And just as we would need an outsider, someone from a very different world, to point out to us the strangeness of what we take for granted, so it takes the distance of 2,000 years for us to see the strangeness in what the ancients took for granted. The strangeness, in other words, is not really in the customs themselves, but in the distance from which we view them, and that same distance would make our own lives look just as strange to eyes like theirs. So that is the spirit in which we will wander through the strange old world tonight, gently, curiously, without alarm, marveling at how differently people once lived and thought, and feeling, perhaps, a quiet gratitude for the changes that have come, and a quiet humility about the things our own age takes for granted that may seem, to those who come after us, just as strange. Let that gentle thought settle over you now, soft and calming in the dark, as we prepare to step back across the centuries. We turn now to the first of the strange old ways, to the shape of the ancient household itself. Let us begin our wander through the strange old world with the place where all life began and centered, the household, for the ancient home was arranged in ways that would seem to us deeply strange, built upon assumptions about family and authority and belonging quite unlike our own. To step into an ancient Greek or Roman household is to enter a world organized on principles we would scarcely recognize, and it makes a fitting place to begin our gentle journey into the ordinary strangeness of the classical age. At the head of the Roman household stood the father, and his authority over his family was of a kind almost unimaginable to us. For the Roman father, the pater familias, held a power over his household that was vast and, in principle, near absolute. This was not merely the ordinary authority of a parent, but a formal and legal power over the lives of all those beneath him, his children, his household, and his dependents. A power that in the earliest times extended in principle even over their very lives. The father's word was law within the household, his authority the organizing principle of the family, and the members of the household lived under his rule in a way that would strike us as extraordinary. The whole Roman family was structured around this towering paternal authority, an arrangement so normal to them as to be invisible, and so strange to us as to be almost incomprehensible. This paternal power extended over grown children as well as small ones, for the authority of the Roman father did not simply end when his children came of age, but continued, in principle, throughout his life. A grown son, a man with a household and children of his own, might still in a formal sense remain under the authority of his own father, subject to that ancient paternal power for as long as the father lived. The idea that adulthood brought independence from one's father, so natural to us, was not the assumption of the Roman world, where the bonds of paternal authority stretched across the generations and bound even grown and established men to the rule of their fathers. It was a world organized around the enduring authority of the eldest male, in a way that shaped the whole structure of family and society. The household itself, moreover, was a larger and more complex thing than our idea of a family, for it included not only the immediate family, but a wider circle of dependents and, very often, those who were held in bondage, the enslaved members of the household, who formed a part of nearly every home of any substance. The ancient household was not the small private family unit we imagine, but a larger economic and social entity, encompassing many people bound together under the authority of its head, of whom the enslaved were an ordinary and unremarkable part. This is a matter we will return to gently, for it is among the darkest of the ancient world's normalities. But we touch upon it here to note how differently the very idea of the household was constituted, how much larger and more complex and more troubling its membership was than our own. The women of the household, too, occupied a place quite unlike that of women in our own world, their lives and roles and freedoms circumscribed in ways that varied between Greece and Rome, but that everywhere fell far short of anything we would consider just. This too we will explore more gently in its own time. But here at the threshold, stepping into the ancient home, we may simply notice how strange a place it is, how differently arranged, how founded upon assumptions of authority and belonging and hierarchy quite unlike our own. A familiar word, home, opening onto a world profoundly unfamiliar. Let that first strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now to one of the deepest and most troubling of the ancient normalities, the institution that underlay so much of classical life. We come now, gently and with care, to the deepest and most troubling of all the ancient normalities, the one that underlay so much of classical life and yet was, to the Greeks and Romans, so entirely ordinary as to pass almost without comment, the institution of slavery. We shall treat this soberly and without dwelling on anything distressing, for it is not our purpose tonight to trouble you, but it would be dishonest to wander through the ancient world without acknowledging the vast and painful reality upon which so much of it was built. The plain and difficult fact is that the ancient world, both Greek and Roman, rested upon the labor of the enslaved, and that this was regarded not as a scandal or an evil, but simply as a natural and permanent feature of the world, as ordinary and unremarkable as the weather. Enslaved people were present in great numbers throughout the classical world, laboring in the households, the farms, the workshops, the mines, and every other corner of the economy, and their bondage was woven so deeply into the fabric of society that it was scarcely questioned at all. To the ancient mind, the division of the world into the free and the enslaved seemed as natural as the division into men and women, or young and old, simply the way that things were and always had been. This is perhaps the hardest thing for us to grasp, not the existence of such bondage, but its utter ordinariness, its acceptance as a simple fact of life. The enslaved of the ancient world came to their condition by many paths, most often through the fortunes of war, for it was the common practice of the age that those defeated in war might be enslaved, and the conquests of the classical world fed a steady stream of people into bondage. Others were born into slavery, the children of the enslaved, while still others fell into it through debt or other misfortunes. However they came to it, they formed a vast portion of the ancient population, an entire class of people held in bondage, and regarded, in law and in custom, not fully as persons, but in large part as property, belonging to those who held them. This reduction of human beings to the status of possessions is among the darkest of the ancient world's assumptions, and yet to that world it was simply the accepted order of things. The work of the enslaved touched every part of ancient life, for they labored in every setting and at every task, from the humblest drudgery to positions of real skill and responsibility. Some worked in the fields and the mines under the hardest conditions. Others labored in the households as domestic servants. Still others, the more fortunate, worked as craftsmen, teachers, physicians, and administrators, their skills valued even as their bondage remained. The range of their conditions was wide, from the truly terrible to the relatively comfortable, but all shared the fundamental fact of their bondage, the absence of freedom, the belonging to another. And all of this was, to the ancient world, simply normal, the unremarkable foundation upon which the whole edifice of classical civilization was raised. It is a sobering thing to reflect that the achievements we so admire in the ancient world, the philosophy and the art, the architecture and the literature, the leisure that made them possible, rested in large part upon this vast foundation of unfree labor. The citizens who debated philosophy in the marketplace, who created the art and the poetry we still treasure, were very often freed to do so by the labor of the enslaved who sustained their households and their economy. This is not a comfortable thought, but it is an important one, and it belongs to any honest wandering through the ancient world. We shall not dwell upon it further tonight, for we have touched it gently, and that is enough. But let us carry it with us, quietly, as we go, a reminder of the darkness that lay beneath the brightness of the classical world. Let that sober reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to another of the great differences of the ancient world, the place and treatment of women. Among the many ways in which the ancient world differed from our own, few are more striking than the place it assigned to women, whose lives were circumscribed and constrained in ways that would seem, to us, deeply unjust, and yet that were, to the Greeks and Romans, simply the natural and proper order of things. We shall consider this gently, for our purpose is understanding rather than indignation, but the lives of ancient women form an essential part of the strange old world we are exploring. In the Greek world, and particularly in Athens, the lives of respectable women were confined to a remarkable degree, their world largely restricted to the household and its concerns, their public role almost non-existent. A woman of good family was expected to remain largely within the home, managing the household and its affairs, appearing little in public life, and taking no part at all in the political and intellectual life of the city that we so admire. The great public world of the Greek city, the marketplace and the assembly, the philosophy and the politics, was a world of men, from which respectable women were largely excluded, their sphere, the private one of the home. To the Greeks this seemed entirely natural, the proper arrangement of things, and the confinement of women to the domestic sphere passed without question as simply the way the world was ordered. The Roman world allowed women somewhat greater freedom and visibility than the Greek, and Roman women could move more freely in society, appear in public, and exercise real influence within the family, and even, indirectly, beyond it. Yet even in Rome, women lived under significant constraints, excluded from formal political power, subject in law to the authority of fathers and husbands, and expected to conform to strict ideals of feminine virtue and behavior. The Roman matron might command real respect and wield real influence within her sphere, but that sphere remained bounded, her freedoms limited, her life shaped and constrained by the assumptions of a world that regarded the authority of men as natural and proper, even at its most generous. The ancient world assigned to women a place decidedly beneath that of men. Marriage in the ancient world, moreover, was arranged upon principles quite unlike our own, a matter more of family and property and alliance than of affection, and often contracted when the bride was very young indeed by our standards. Marriages were commonly arranged by families for their own advantage, the wishes of the young people concerned counting for little, and girls were frequently married at ages that would seem to us far too young. The romantic idea of marriage as a union freely chosen for love, so central to our own understanding, was not the assumption of the ancient world, where marriage served the purposes of family and society, and where the young bride passed from the authority of her father to that of her husband as a matter of course. This too was simply normal, the accepted way of things, unremarkable to those who practiced it. And yet, within these constraints, ancient women lived full and various lives, and we should not imagine them merely as victims, for they were also mothers and managers, wives and widows, priestesses and businesswomen, exercising what influence and agency their world allowed, and often a good deal more than the formal arrangements might suggest. The reality of women's lives was always richer and more complex than the rules that bound them, and ancient women found ways to exercise power and shape their world even within the constraints imposed upon them. But those constraints were real and severe, and they form an essential part of the strange old world we are exploring, a world whose assumptions about half of humanity would strike us today as profoundly unjust, and yet that seemed, to those who lived within them, entirely and unremarkably normal. Let that reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to one of the most famous and troubling of the ancient normalities, the entertainments of the arena. We come now to one of the most famous and most troubling of all the customs of the ancient world, an entertainment so bound up with our image of Rome that it has become almost a symbol of the age. The games of the arena, the great public spectacles in which combat and death were offered as entertainment to the roaring crowds. We shall approach this soberly and gently, without any dwelling on the grim particulars, for it is not the violence itself we wish to examine, but the astonishing fact that such things were, to the Romans, an ordinary and celebrated part of public life. The Romans gathered in their great amphitheatres in enormous numbers to watch the spectacles of the arena, and these entertainments were not the shameful indulgence of a depraved few, but a central and celebrated feature of public life, attended by all classes, sponsored by the powerful, and woven into the civic and political fabric of the city. The games were public occasions of the greatest importance, offered to the people as gifts by emperors and magistrates, celebrated and anticipated and enjoyed by vast crowds, an ordinary part of what it meant to live in the Roman world. That entertainments involving real combat and real death should be so central, so celebrated, so entirely accepted, is among the most disturbing of the ancient normalities, and yet accepted they entirely were. The combatants of the arena were most often the enslaved, the condemned, and the captured, compelled to fight for the entertainment of the crowd, though some free men also entered the arena, whether drawn by the hope of glory or driven by desperation. These fighters were trained and maintained for their deadly purpose, and the spectacles in which they appeared were elaborate and various, staged with great expense and ingenuity for the pleasure of the watching crowds. We shall not describe the particulars of what took place, for there is no need, and it would trouble the calm of our night. It is enough to note that these were spectacles of a kind we would find horrifying, and that to the Romans they were a normal and celebrated entertainment, enjoyed without apparent unease by a people otherwise capable of great refinement and humanity. This is perhaps the aspect of the arena that most troubles reflection, that the same Roman civilization capable of such achievement in law and literature, engineering and philosophy, could also embrace with enthusiasm entertainments of such cruelty, and see no contradiction in doing so. The games were not the mark of a barbarous people, but of a sophisticated and accomplished one, which simply did not regard the suffering of the arena's victims as we would, holding many of those who died there to be outside the circle of full human concern. It is a sobering reminder that great cultural achievement and great moral blindness can exist together in the same society, that a people can be at once admirable and, by our lights, capable of terrible things, all without any sense of contradiction. That is among the hardest and most important lessons of the ancient world. To the Roman spectator, then, a day at the arena was simply a day's entertainment, an ordinary pleasure of civic life, anticipated and enjoyed without any sense of doing wrong. The crowds that gathered were not monsters but ordinary people, enjoying what their society offered as normal entertainment, shaped by the assumptions of their age as we are shaped by ours. This is not to excuse the cruelty of the arena, which was real and terrible, but to understand how it could be so normal, so accepted, so woven into the life of a great civilization. And it stands as perhaps the starkest example of our theme tonight, the strange and troubling gulf between what one age finds normal and what another finds monstrous. Let that sober reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to something a little lighter, the strange customs of the ancient table. After the darkness of the arena, let us turn to something gentler, though no less strange, the customs of the ancient table, the ways in which the Greeks and Romans ate and drank and feasted, which would seem to us, in their own way, remarkably peculiar, for the ancient feast was conducted according to customs quite unlike our own, and to sit down to dinner in the classical world would be to find oneself in genuinely unfamiliar territory. The most famous peculiarity of the ancient feast, at least among the Romans and the Greeks who influenced them, was the custom of dining while reclining. For the diners at a proper feast did not sit upright at a table as we do, but lay upon couches, propped on one elbow, eating in a reclining position that would strike us as most peculiar. This reclining posture was the mark of the civilized feast, the proper way for a free person to dine, and the dining room was arranged with couches around the table for this purpose. To eat while lying down, to spend a long feast propped upon one's elbow, seems to us an awkward and peculiar way to take a meal, and yet, to the ancient world, it was the very height of civilized dining, the natural and proper posture for a feast. The food itself, too, could be strange, for the ancient palate delighted in flavors and dishes that would seem to us decidedly odd, and the elaborate feasts of the wealthy in particular featured combinations and preparations quite unlike our own. The Romans were especially fond of a fermented fish sauce that they added to a great many dishes, a pungent condiment that flavored much of their cooking, and that might strike us as an acquired taste indeed. The wealthy delighted in elaborate and sometimes bizarre dishes, exotic ingredients prepared in surprising ways, the whole designed to impress and astonish the guests. The ancient feast, at its grandest, was a performance as much as a meal, and its flavors and dishes would seem to us a strange and unfamiliar cuisine. The drinking of wine, too, followed customs quite unlike our own, for the Greeks and Romans very rarely drank their wine undiluted, regarding the drinking of neat wine as barbarous and uncivilized, and instead mixed it with water before drinking. To drink wine unmixed was considered a mark of excess and a want of civilization, and the proper way to drink was to dilute the wine with water, often a good deal of it, in a large mixing vessel from which the diluted wine was served. This custom, so central to ancient drinking, seems curious to us, and it reflects a whole attitude toward wine and its proper consumption quite different from our own. The Greek drinking party in particular, the symposium, was an elaborate social institution with its own customs and rituals, at which the diluted wine flowed, and the conversation, it was hoped, rose to great heights. There was, too, the matter of who sat where and who ate what, for the ancient feast was a keenly hierarchical affair, in which the arrangement of the diners, and even the quality of the food they were served, reflected their status and their standing with the host. The most honored guests reclined in the best positions, closest to the host, while those of lesser standing were placed further off, and it was not unknown for guests of different rank to be served food and wine of different quality at the very same table, the finer dishes for the honored, and the plainer for the rest. This open marking of status at the dinner table, so contrary to our own notions of hospitality, was to the ancient world a natural expression of the hierarchies that ordered their society, brought even to the sharing of a meal among friends. The feast was not merely a gathering, but a map of the social order, laid out in couches and courses. There were many other peculiarities of the ancient table, the absence of many implements we consider essential, the different structure of the meals through the day, the various customs and courtesies that governed the feast. all of which would make dining in the ancient world a strange experience for us. But these are gentle strangenesses, curious rather than troubling, the harmless oddities of a world differently arranged. And they remind us that even in the most ordinary and universal of human activities, the sharing of food and drink, the ancient world followed its own distinct customs, as normal to them as ours are to us, and as strange to us as ours would be to them. Let that gentler strangeness settle softly in the dark. We turn now to the ancient understanding of the gods and the unseen world. To wander through the ancient world is to enter a world saturated with the divine, in which the gods and the unseen powers were present at every turn, and in which practices we would find strange, and beliefs we would find astonishing, were simply the ordinary texture of religious life. For the Greeks and Romans understood the divine quite differently from the ways familiar to us, and their religion, so central to their lives, would seem to us a strange and unfamiliar thing. The gods of the ancient world were many, a whole crowded pantheon of divine beings presiding over every aspect of life and nature, and the relationship between people and these gods was one not so much of faith and devotion as of exchange and obligation. The ancient worshipper sought to keep the gods favorable through the proper performance of rituals and the offering of sacrifices, a matter of correct practice rather than inner belief, of doing the right things in the right way to secure the goodwill of the divine powers. This was a religion of ritual and observance, of maintaining right relations with a multitude of gods through the careful performance of the proper rites, quite unlike the religions of faith and doctrine more familiar to us. To neglect the gods, to fail in the proper observances, was to risk their anger and the misfortunes it might bring, and so the rituals were performed with care throughout the round of life. Central to this religion was the practice of sacrifice, the offering of gifts to the gods, and above all the sacrifice of animals, which formed the very heart of ancient worship. The offering of animals upon the altars of the gods was the central act of ancient religion, performed at every festival and on every important occasion, a public and communal rite that bound the community together in the worship of its gods. We shall not dwell on the particulars of these sacrifices, which were conducted according to careful ritual, but note only that this practice, so central to ancient religion and so foreign to our own, was to the ancient world the most natural and important of religious acts, the proper way of honoring the gods and securing their favor. The smoke of sacrifice rose from the altars of the ancient world as the ordinary and constant expression of its piety. The ancient world was also saturated with practices we would call superstition, with omens and portents, divination and prophecy, curses and charms, all of which were taken with the greatest seriousness and woven into the fabric of daily and public life. The ancients sought to read the will of the gods and the shape of the future in a great variety of signs, in the flight of birds, in the entrails of sacrificed animals, in dreams and oracles and unusual occurrences, and important decisions both private and public might turn upon such readings. To us this seems mere superstition, but to the ancient world it was a serious and important business, the reading of the divine will, undertaken with care by those skilled in its practices and capable of guiding the greatest affairs of state. The great oracles, where the gods were believed to speak through their priests, were consulted on the weightiest matters and held in the highest reverence. There was, too, a darker side to this world of the unseen, a widespread belief in curses and malign magic, in the power of spells and charms to harm one's enemies, which ordinary people took entirely seriously and to which they resorted readily. People sought to harm their rivals and enemies through curses, inscribed and deposited in the proper way, calling upon the powers of the unseen world to bring misfortune upon their targets. This traffic with the darker powers was an ordinary part of ancient life, a normal recourse for those with enemies to harm or scores to settle, and it reveals a world in which the boundary between religion and magic, between the divine and the uncanny, was quite different from our own. All of this, the gods and the sacrifices, the omens and the curses, made up the rich and strange religious world of the ancients, as normal to them as it is foreign to us. Let that strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the ancient understanding of the body and of medicine. The ancient understanding of the human body and the medicine that sought to heal it form another realm of the strange and the unfamiliar, for the Greeks and Romans understood the workings of the body in ways quite unlike our own, and their medical practices, though sometimes surprisingly sophisticated, rested upon foundations we would find quite mistaken. We shall wander through this gently, for it is among the more curious and less troubling of the ancient strangenesses. The foundation of ancient medicine was the theory of the four humours, the belief that the body was governed by four fluids whose balance determined health and whose imbalance caused disease. Health was understood as the proper balance of these humours, and illness as their disturbance, and the whole edifice of ancient medicine was built upon this idea, which would endure for many centuries after the classical age. The physician sought to restore the balance of the humours through various treatments, adjusting the patient's regimen and administering remedies according to this theory. It was a coherent and rational system, in its way, an attempt to understand the body in natural terms, and yet it rested upon a fundamental misunderstanding of how the body actually works, and much that followed from it was mistaken. From this theory flowed many practices that we would find strange or alarming, treatments aimed at restoring the balance of the humours that could be more harmful than the ailments they sought to cure. Among the most common was the practice of bloodletting, the deliberate drawing of blood from the patient in the belief that it would restore the humoral balance, a treatment applied to a great many conditions and continued for many centuries. Various other treatments sought to purge or adjust the humours in ways that we would find mistaken and sometimes harmful. We shall not dwell on the particulars, but note that ancient medicine, for all its genuine observation and its real achievements, was built upon a mistaken foundation, and that its treatments could do as much harm as good. And yet the ancient world also produced genuine medical knowledge and skill, careful observers who described diseases accurately, skilled practitioners who could set bones and treat wounds and perform certain surgeries, and a tradition of medical learning that, for all its errors, represented a real attempt to understand and heal the body through natural means. The great physicians of the ancient world were careful and intelligent observers, and much of what they learned through observation was genuinely valuable, passed down and built upon for centuries. Ancient medicine was thus a curious mixture of the genuinely useful and the entirely mistaken, of careful observation and false theory, of real skill and harmful practice, all combined in a tradition that sought, with the tools and understanding available to it, to heal the ailments of the body. Alongside this rational medicine, moreover, there flourished a whole world of religious and magical healing, for many people sought cures not from physicians but from the gods, visiting the healing shrines where the divine was believed to cure the sick, and resorting to charms and amulets and folk remedies of every kind. The healing sanctuaries, where the sick came to sleep in the hope of a divine cure, were among the most popular of ancient religious sites, and the line between medicine and religion, between the physician's treatment and the god's miracle, was not sharply drawn. All of this made up the strange and various world of ancient healing, in which careful medicine and humoral theory and divine cure and folk magic existed side by side, as normal to the ancient world as our own quite different medicine is to us. Let that curious strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now, gently and with care, to the difficult matter of how the ancient world treated its children. We come now, gently and with the greatest care, to one of the more difficult of the ancient normalities, the treatment of children in the classical world, which differed from our own in ways that can be troubling to contemplate. We shall touch upon this softly and briefly, without any dwelling on distressing particulars, For it is not our purpose to trouble you, but it belongs to an honest account of the strange old world, and we shall handle it with the gentleness it deserves. The most difficult of these matters is that the ancient world did not regard the lives of infants with the same absolute protectiveness that we do, and that the practice of abandoning unwanted infants, leaving them exposed to their fate, was a known and, in some times and places, an accepted feature of ancient life. We shall not dwell on this at all beyond acknowledging it, for it is among the darkest of the ancient world's practices, and there is no need to examine it closely. It is enough to note, soberly and sadly, that the ancient world's valuation of infant life differed profoundly from our own, and that a practice we would find utterly abhorrent was, to some in the ancient world, a sorrowful but accepted recourse. We touch it, acknowledge it, and move gently on. Behind this difficult fact lay a whole set of attitudes and circumstances quite unlike our own, the hard realities of a world of high infant mortality, limited resources, and different understandings of the value and status of the very young. In a world where so many infants died young in any case, where families lived close to the edge of survival, and where the newborn was not yet regarded as a full member of the family and community, attitudes toward infant life took shapes that we would find deeply troubling. This does not lessen the darkness of the practices that resulted, but it helps us to understand how they could exist, how they could seem, to those who practiced them, a sorrowful necessity rather than a monstrous crime. It is another instance of our theme, the vast gulf between what one age accepts and what another abhors. Those children who were raised, however, were often cherished and loved as children have always been, for the ancient world, whatever its harsher practices, also knew the ordinary love of parents for their children, and the raising of the young was attended by real affection and care. We should not imagine the ancient family as cold or loveless, for the evidence shows us parents who doted on their children, who mourned them deeply when they died, who took joy in them and cared for them as parents always have. The harshness of certain ancient practices existed alongside, and not instead of, the ordinary tenderness of family love, and this combination, so difficult for us to reconcile, was simply the reality of the ancient world. The education and raising of children, too, followed patterns quite unlike our own, with their own customs of discipline, their own ideas of what children should learn and how they should be treated, their own arrangements for the passage from childhood to adulthood. The details varied greatly between Greece and Rome, between rich and poor, between boys and girls, but everywhere the raising of children followed the assumptions of a world quite different from ours. We shall not explore all of this in detail, for we have touched already upon difficult ground and handled it gently, and that is enough. Let us simply carry away the understanding that childhood in the ancient world was a different and sometimes harder thing than in our own, shaped by assumptions we would find troubling, and yet also warmed, as childhood always has been, by the ordinary love of families for their young. Let that gentle reflection settle in the dark. We turn now to the ancient attitude toward the human body itself. Among the many differences between the ancient world and our own, one of the more surprising concerns attitudes toward the naked body, for the Greeks in particular regarded public nakedness in certain contexts with an ease and acceptance that would astonish us, an attitude woven into some of the most admired institutions of their culture. We shall consider this gently and matter-of-factly, for it is among the more curious and less troubling of the ancient strangenesses. The most striking instance was the Greek practice of athletic exercise and competition, performed entirely unclothed, for the Greek athletes trained and competed in the nude, and this was regarded not as shameful, but as natural and even admirable, an expression of the Greek celebration of the healthy human form. The very word for the place where the Greeks exercised, the gymnasium, derives from their word for naked, so bound up was athletic training with the unclothed body. The great athletic festivals, including the games from which our own Olympic tradition descends, featured competitors who performed without clothing, before crowds who saw in this nothing improper, but rather the admirable display of physical excellence. To the Greeks, the trained and healthy body was a thing to be celebrated and displayed, and public nakedness in the athletic context carried no shame at all. This ease with the unclothed body extended into Greek art as well, which celebrated the human form, and particularly the male form, with a frankness and admiration that reflected the same attitude, the body seen as beautiful and worthy of display, rather than as something to be hidden. The sculptures and images of the Greek world present the human form with an openness that flowed from this whole attitude, the celebration of physical beauty and excellence that was so central to Greek culture. This was not, to the Greek mind, a matter of impropriety, but of the admiration of the beautiful and the excellent, the human body, treated as a fit subject for celebration and art. The Romans, it should be said, were somewhat more reserved in these matters than the Greeks, and did not share fully the Greek ease with public nakedness, regarding it with somewhat more of the reticence familiar to us. Roman attitudes were more guarded, and the full Greek enthusiasm for athletic nakedness was not entirely shared by the more decorous Romans. Yet even among the Romans, attitudes toward the body and its exposure differed considerably from our own, particularly in the setting of the public baths, where a degree of communal nakedness was simply an ordinary and accepted part of daily life, as we shall see. All of this reflects a whole set of attitudes toward the body, toward nakedness and shame and display, quite different from those that have shaped our own sensibilities. What one age regards as shameful and requiring concealment, another may regard as natural and even admirable, and the ancient attitudes toward the unclothed body, so different from our own, are a gentle instance of this larger truth. To the Greek athlete, stepping unclothed onto the field of competition, there was nothing strange or shameful in the least. It was simply the natural way of things, the admirable display of the trained body, as normal to him as our own quite different customs are to us. Let that curious strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now to one of the great institutions of Roman daily life, the public baths. Among the most characteristic and beloved institutions of the Roman world was the public bath, a place of bathing and socializing and relaxation that formed a central part of daily life, and whose customs would seem to us, in various ways, remarkably strange. The Roman baths were far more than a place to get clean. They were a social institution of the first importance, and to understand Roman daily life, one must understand the central place of the bath. The Romans bathed communally in great public bath complexes that were among the grandest and most popular buildings of their cities, and the daily visit to the baths was, for many Romans, a central ritual of ordinary life. These were not small or private facilities, but great public establishments, often magnificent in their architecture and appointments, where large numbers of people gathered to bathe together. Bathing was a communal and social activity, conducted in company, quite unlike our own private bathing, and the baths were places of gathering and conversation and relaxation, as much as of washing. To visit the baths was to participate in one of the central social rituals of Roman life, a daily occasion of leisure and sociability enjoyed by all classes. The process of Roman bathing was itself elaborate, involving a progression through a series of rooms of different temperatures, from warm to hot to cold, along with various other elements of the bathing ritual. The bather moved through heated rooms that induced sweating, through hot and cold baths, and through various other stages of the elaborate bathing process, which might also include exercise, massage, and other treatments. This was a sophisticated and elaborate ritual, made possible by the remarkable Roman engineering that heated the great bath complexes, and it occupied a considerable portion of the day for those who indulged in it fully. The baths were a place to spend hours, not minutes, a center of leisure and relaxation as much as of hygiene. To us, the most striking strangeness of the Roman baths would be their communal and public nature, the bathing together of many people in a shared space, with a degree of nakedness and physical closeness that our own more private sensibilities would find remarkable. The Romans thought nothing of bathing in company, of the communal nakedness and closeness that the baths involved, for this was simply the ordinary way of things, an accepted and unremarkable part of daily life. What would strike us as a startling lack of privacy was, to the Roman, simply normal, the natural way to take one's daily bath, in the sociable company of one's fellow citizens. The baths were also, it should be said, places where the social life of the city was conducted, where people met and talked and did business, where news was exchanged and friendships maintained, a social centre of the greatest importance. To go to the baths was to participate in the communal life of the city, to see and be seen, to keep up with the affairs of one's world. This central social institution, so different from anything in our own experience, was among the defining features of Roman daily life, as normal and essential to the Romans as it would seem strange and remarkable to us. Let that curious strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now to a more earthy matter, the necessary business of ancient sanitation. Let us turn now, with a light touch and a gentle humour, to one of the more earthy of the ancient strangenesses, the matter of sanitation and the necessary business of daily life. For the Greeks and Romans managed these homely necessities in ways that would strike us as remarkably public and communal. We shall handle this delicately, and without any dwelling on the indelicate, for it is among the more amusing and harmless of the ancient oddities. The Romans, famous for their engineering, built public facilities for the necessary business of life, and these were, by our standards, remarkably communal and lacking in privacy, arranged so that many people attended to their needs together in a shared space, without the partitions and privacy we consider essential. The Roman public convenience was a communal affair, a row of seats in a shared room where people sat together and attended to their needs in company, conversing, it is said, quite sociably as they did so. To the Roman, this was simply the ordinary arrangement, the natural way of things, and the want of privacy that would mortify us occasioned no embarrassment at all. This communal approach to the most private of necessities is among the most striking instances of how differently the ancient world drew the boundaries of privacy and modesty. The Romans also possessed remarkable systems of drains and sewers, genuine feats of engineering that carried away the waste of their great cities, and running water that supplied their public facilities. The engineering that underlay Roman sanitation was genuinely impressive, and in some respects the Romans managed these matters better than many later ages. Yet the whole arrangement, for all its engineering sophistication, rested upon a communal and public approach to the necessary business of life that would strike us as remarkably lacking in privacy, the private made public, in a way we would find most uncomfortable. There was, too, the matter of how the ancients managed certain necessities of cleanliness, and here we shall be especially delicate, noting only that they employed shared implements and communal arrangements that our own sense of hygiene would find alarming. The ancient approach to these matters of personal cleanliness involved a degree of sharing and communality that we would find quite unsanitary, and that reflects, again, a whole different set of assumptions about privacy, hygiene, and the boundaries between people. We shall say no more of the particulars, for the point is made, and it is a gentle and slightly comic one, that the ancients managed these homely necessities in ways remarkably different from our own. For all their sophistication in some respects, then, the ancient arrangements for the necessary business of life reveal a world that drew the lines of privacy and modesty and hygiene quite differently from our own, that thought nothing of arrangements we would find mortifying, and that managed the homeliest necessities of daily life according to assumptions entirely its own. It is a gentle reminder that even in the most universal and unglamorous of human needs, the ancient world followed its own strange customs, as normal to them as ours are to us. And there is something oddly comforting, as we lie here in our own private comfort, in contemplating how differently these homely matters were once arranged. Let that gentle and slightly comic strangeness settle softly in the dark. We turn now to the crowded and chaotic world of the ancient city. To wander into a great city of the ancient world, and Rome above all, would be to enter a place of extraordinary crowding, noise and chaos, a teeming and often dangerous environment quite unlike our image of serene classical marble, and organized according to assumptions about urban life that would strike us as remarkable. Let us step gently into the crowded streets of the ancient city and see how strange and how challenging a place it was to live. The great city of Rome was, at its height, enormously crowded, packed with a vast population into a space that strained to contain it, its people crammed into towering tenement buildings, and its streets choked with the press of humanity. Most of the ordinary people of Rome lived not in the elegant houses we might imagine, but in tall, crowded apartment blocks, packed close together along narrow streets. Many people crowded into small and often squalid living spaces. These tenements rose several stories high, and the higher and cheaper the dwelling, the worse its conditions, so that the poor lived crammed into the upper floors under conditions of real hardship and danger. The crowding of the ancient city was intense, its people packed together in a density that we would find scarcely bearable. The tenement buildings themselves were often poorly built and genuinely dangerous, liable to fire and even to collapse, so that the ordinary dwellings of the Roman poor posed real hazards to those who lived in them. Fire was a constant danger in the crowded city, where cooking flames and lamps amid the packed wooden structures could set whole districts ablaze, and the poorly constructed tenements could collapse upon their inhabitants. To live in the ancient city was to live with these constant dangers, the fire and the collapse that threatened the crowded dwellings of the poor. It was a hazardous environment, the great city, for all its grandeur, a place where ordinary life was lived amid real and constant peril. The streets of the ancient city were choked with noise and filth, and the ceaseless press of people, a chaotic and often unpleasant environment, quite unlike the ordered spaces we might imagine. The narrow streets were crowded with people and animals and vehicles, filled with the cries of vendors and the din of traffic, and fouled with the refuse and waste of the teeming population. The noise was said to be tremendous, the streets never quiet, the press of humanity ceaseless, and moving through the city was a matter of pushing through crowds and dodging hazards. This was the ordinary environment of ancient urban life, chaotic and crowded and loud, as normal to those who lived in it as it would seem overwhelming to us. And the city could be a dangerous place in other ways as well, for the streets were not safe after dark, when robbery and violence were real dangers, and the prudent stayed within doors. The ancient city had little in the way of the policing and public safety we take for granted, and the streets by night were the domain of criminals and dangers, so that to venture out after dark was to take a real risk. This too was simply a fact of ancient urban life. The danger of the streets, the want of public safety, the hazards that attended life in the great and crowded city. For all the grandeur of the ancient city, then, ordinary life within it was crowded, chaotic, hazardous, and often hard, a teeming and difficult environment that its people accepted as simply the nature of city life. Let that crowded strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now, gently and with care, to the ancient approach to crime and its punishment. The ancient approach to crime and punishment forms another realm in which the assumptions of the classical world differed sharply from our own. For the Greeks and Romans punished wrongdoing in ways that could be severe and harsh, and drew the lines of justice according to principles quite unlike ours. We shall consider this soberly and without dwelling on any grim particulars, for it is not the harshness itself we wish to examine, but the different understanding of justice that lay behind it. The punishments of the ancient world could be severe indeed, and the classical law did not share our own concern for the humane treatment of those it punished, imposing penalties that we would consider cruel, with little of the restraint we would expect. Punishment in the ancient world was often harsh and public, intended to deter and to display the power of the law, and the sensibilities that lead us to seek humane and proportionate punishment were not those of the classical age. We shall not describe the particular penalties, for there is no need, but note only that they could be severe, and that the ancient world did not regard their severity as we would, holding harsh punishment to be a normal and proper response to wrongdoing. The ancient law, moreover, did not treat all people equally, but drew sharp distinctions between different classes of people, so that the same offence might be punished quite differently depending on the status of the offender. The free and the enslaved, the citizen and the non-citizen, the high-born and the low, were subject to different treatment under the law, with the lower orders liable to harsher punishments than their betters. This inequality was not a corruption of the system, but a principle of it, the law openly treating people differently according to their status, in a way that offends our own conviction of equality before the law. Justice in the ancient world was not blind but keenly aware of status, dispensing different measures to different classes of people as a matter of settled principle. Particularly troubling to us is the way the ancient legal systems treated the enslaved in matters of justice, subjecting them to treatment in legal proceedings that we would find deeply wrong, a harshness that flowed from their status as property rather than full persons. The enslaved occupied a special and painful place in the ancient administration of justice, subject to treatments in the course of legal proceedings that reflected their reduced status, and that we would regard as gravely unjust. We shall not dwell on the particulars, but note that this was another instance of the profound inequality of ancient justice, and of the terrible consequences of the reduction of human beings to the status of property. Behind all of this lay an understanding of justice and punishment, quite different from our own, one less concerned with the rights and humane treatment of the accused and the punished, more concerned with the display of authority and the maintenance of order and hierarchy. The ancient world did not share our conviction of the equal dignity of all persons before the law, nor our concern for proportionate and humane punishment, and its justice reflected these different assumptions. This too was simply normal to the ancient world, the accepted way of dealing with crime and disorder, and its harshness and inequality, so troubling to us, occasioned little unease among those who practiced it. Let that sober reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the ancient attitude toward war and the treatment of the defeated. War was a constant and accepted feature of the ancient world, woven into the very fabric of classical society, and the ancient attitude toward war and toward the treatment of those defeated in it reflected assumptions quite different from, and often far harsher than, our own. We shall consider this soberly and gently, without dwelling on the grim realities of ancient warfare, for it is the attitudes we wish to understand rather than the horrors themselves. War was, for the ancient world, a normal and even expected part of the life of a people, not the exceptional catastrophe we consider it, but a regular and recurring feature of existence, in which the states of the classical world were frequently engaged. The ancient city or state expected to go to war, prepared for it, and often gloried in it, regarding military success as among the highest of achievements and the waging of war as a normal instrument of policy and a source of honor and wealth. This acceptance of war as a normal part of life, even a desirable one, differs sharply from our own aspiration, however imperfectly realized, toward peace, and reflects a whole different understanding of the place of war in human affairs. To the ancient world, war was simply a recurring fact of existence, to be waged well and won gloriously. The treatment of those defeated in war, moreover, could be exceedingly harsh by our standards, for the ancient world held that the victor might do largely as he wished with the vanquished, and the fate of the defeated could be terrible indeed. Those who lost in war might face the harshest of fates, their cities destroyed, their populations killed, or, very commonly, enslaved, as we have already touched upon. This was regarded not as a crime or an atrocity, but as the normal and accepted consequence of defeat. The victor's right over the vanquished, a settled feature of the way war was understood and conducted. The idea that there should be limits on the treatment of the defeated, protections for the conquered, was largely foreign to the ancient world, which held the fate of the vanquished to lie at the mercy of the victor. This harshness flowed from a whole understanding of war and conquest quite different from our own, one that saw military victory as conferring near absolute rights over the defeated, and that did not extend to the conquered the protections and considerations we would now consider essential. The ancient world had few of the notions we now hold about the laws of war and the treatment of the defeated, regarding conquest as conferring upon the victor a sweeping power over the vanquished. This assumption, so troubling to us, was simply the accepted understanding of the age, the normal way in which war and its consequences were understood, unremarkable to those who lived by it. And yet war was also, for the ancient world, bound up with honor and glory and the highest ideals of the citizen, celebrated in poetry and art, regarded as a noble and even beautiful thing, as well as a harsh one. The same culture that treated the defeated so harshly also surrounded war with ideals of courage and honor and glory, seeing in the warrior and his deeds something admirable and even sublime. This combination of harsh practice and noble ideal, of terrible consequence and celebrated glory, was characteristic of the ancient attitude toward war, and it reflects again the strange gulf between the assumptions of that age and our own. Let that sober reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to how the ancient world regarded the peoples beyond its borders. The ancient world held attitudes toward the peoples beyond its own borders, the foreigners and outsiders it called by various names, that reflected a settled sense of its own superiority and that would strike us as troubling in their assumptions. We shall consider this gently, for it forms an important part of the ancient understanding of the world and the place of different peoples within it. The Greeks divided the world into themselves and everyone else, regarding those who did not share their language and culture as fundamentally different and inferior, lumping the whole vast variety of other peoples under a single dismissive term. To the Greek mind, there were the Greeks, who possessed true civilization, and there were the others, the foreigners whose strange languages sounded to Greek ears like mere babble, and who were regarded as lacking the qualities that made the Greeks superior. This division of the world into the civilized self and the inferior other was a settled assumption of the Greek worldview, a conviction of their own superiority that colored their whole understanding of the peoples around them. It was not questioned but simply assumed, the natural and obvious way of seeing the world. The Romans, for their part, held a similar sense of their own superiority, regarding the peoples they conquered as lesser and themselves as bearers of a superior civilization, even as they absorbed those peoples into their empire. The Roman looked upon the many peoples of the world with a sense of Roman superiority, regarding Roman ways as the height of civilization and other peoples as lesser, however much Rome might in practice absorb and be influenced by those it conquered. This conviction of superiority justified, to the Roman mind, the conquest and rule of other peoples, bringing them under the sway of a civilization the Romans held to be superior to their own. The assumption of superiority was fundamental to the Roman understanding of empire and of Rome's place in the world. These attitudes flowed into the treatment of foreign peoples, justifying their conquest and subjugation, and shaping a whole hierarchy of peoples with the Greeks or Romans at its summit, and others ranged below according to their supposed worth. The conviction that some peoples were naturally superior and others naturally inferior was woven into the ancient understanding of the world, justifying the domination of the lesser by the greater, and shaping the whole structure of ancient attitudes toward other peoples. This ranking of peoples, so troubling to us with our conviction of the fundamental equality of all human beings, was to the ancient world a simple and obvious truth, the natural order of things. And yet the ancient world was also, in its way, remarkably cosmopolitan, absorbing peoples and cultures and ideas from across its vast extent, and the Roman Empire in particular brought together an extraordinary diversity of peoples under a single rule. For all its assumptions of superiority, the ancient world was a place of mixing and exchange, where peoples and cultures met and blended, where the conquered might in time become citizens, and where ideas and customs and gods travelled freely across the Mediterranean world. This complexity of superiority, assumed alongside diversity embraced, was characteristic of the ancient attitude toward the peoples of the world, a mixture of prejudice and openness that reflected the strange and various reality of the classical age. Let that reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to one of the strangest and harshest of all the ancient societies, the world of Sparta. Among all the societies of the ancient world, few were stranger or harsher than that of Sparta, the great Greek city whose whole way of life was organized around the making of warriors, and whose customs would strike us as extraordinarily severe. We shall consider Sparta gently, for it is among the most fascinating of the ancient strangenesses, a whole society organized on principles almost unimaginably different from our own. The Spartans organized their entire society around military discipline and the making of soldiers, subordinating everything, family and comfort and individual life, to the single purpose of producing warriors for the state. Sparta was, in effect, a society organized as a permanent military camp, its whole way of life directed toward the creation of a formidable warrior class, and the ordinary comforts and freedoms of life were sacrificed to this overriding purpose. The individual existed for the state, and the state existed for war, and the whole of Spartan life was shaped by this severe and singular devotion to military excellence. It was a society of a kind almost without parallel, organized on principles of the utmost severity. The upbringing of Spartan boys was famously harsh, for they were taken from their families young and subjected to a rigorous and brutal training regime intended to make them into hardened warriors, enduring hardship and discipline of the severest kind. From a young age, Spartan boys were removed from the comfort of the home and placed into a system of communal upbringing and military training that was deliberately harsh, designed to toughen them and to instill the discipline and endurance of the warrior. This training subjected the young to hardships and severities that we would find shocking, deliberately imposed to forge the Spartan character. The making of a Spartan warrior was a hard and often brutal process, and it began in early childhood and continued through the whole of youth. Spartan society was also sustained, it must be said, by the subjugation of a large enslaved population who did the labor that freed the Spartans to devote themselves to war, and whose treatment was among the harshest in the Greek world. The Spartans held in bondage a large population who worked the land and did the labor of the society, and the relationship between the Spartans and this subject population was one of harsh domination and constant vigilance, for the Spartans lived in fear of revolt. This dark foundation, the subjugation of a large population to sustain the warrior society, was essential to the Spartan system, and its harshness was among the most troubling features of that severe world. Even the women of Sparta lived differently from other Greek women, enjoying greater freedom and a more active life than their counterparts elsewhere, though this too was bent to the purposes of the warrior state. Spartan women were given a physical education and a degree of freedom unusual in the Greek world, but this served the state's purpose of producing strong mothers for strong warriors, and even the relative freedom of Spartan women was shaped by the overriding military purpose of the society. In every respect, then, Spartan life was organized around the making of warriors and the service of the state, a whole society of extraordinary severity and singular purpose, as strange and harsh a world as the ancient Mediterranean produced. And yet to the Spartans it was simply their way of life, normal and even admirable, the source of their famous excellence and pride. Let that severe strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now to how the ancient world regarded death and the dead. The ancient attitude toward death and the dead, toward the passing of life and the proper treatment of those who had died, followed customs and beliefs quite different from our own, and forms another realm of the strange and the unfamiliar in the classical world. We shall wander through this gently, for death, though solemn, need not be troubling to contemplate from our safe and comfortable distance. The ancients lived far closer to death than we do, for in a world of high mortality, frequent war, and limited medicine, death was a constant and familiar presence, and the passing of loved ones, including many children, was a common and expected part of life. Death was not the hidden and distant thing it has become for us, but a familiar companion, present in every family and every life, its frequency lending it a place in ordinary existence quite different from its place in our own. This familiarity with death shaped the whole ancient attitude toward it, breeding not indifference but a kind of acceptance, a recognition of death as an ordinary and inescapable part of the human lot. The ancient world lived alongside death in a way that we, with our longer lives and hidden dying, can scarcely imagine. The funeral customs of the ancient world were elaborate and important, for the proper treatment of the dead was a matter of the greatest concern, bound up with religious duty and family honor and the fate of the soul. The ancients took great care over the rites of death, the proper preparation and disposal of the body, the ceremonies of mourning and burial, for these were held to be essential both to the honor of the family and to the well-being of the dead in the world beyond. To fail in the proper rites was a serious matter, a dishonor to the dead and a danger to the living, and so the funeral customs were observed with care. These rites varied between Greece and Rome, and across the long span of ancient history, but everywhere they were regarded as of the greatest importance. The ancient beliefs about what came after death were various, and, to us, often strange, involving ideas of a shadowy underworld to which the souls of the dead descended, and a whole geography of the afterlife quite unlike our own conceptions. The ancients imagined the fate of the dead in ways that differed from the beliefs more familiar to us, picturing a dim underworld where the shades of the departed continued a shadowy existence, and developing elaborate ideas about the journey of the soul and its fate beyond death. These beliefs shaped the funeral customs and the mourning of the dead, and they reflect a whole understanding of death and the afterlife, particular to the ancient world. The geography of the ancient underworld, its rivers and regions and the fates it held, formed a rich and strange mythology of death. Mourning, too, followed customs quite different from our own, often more open and demonstrative, with prescribed periods and practices of grief that structured the response to loss. The ancients mourned their dead according to established customs, with practices of grief and remembrance that were more public and formalized than our own more private mourning. These customs gave shape to grief and bound the community in the shared acknowledgement of loss, structuring the response to death in ways that reflected the ancient understanding of mortality and remembrance. All of this, the familiarity with death, the elaborate funeral rites, the strange beliefs about the afterlife, the formal customs of mourning, made up the ancient world's rich and distinctive relationship with death, as normal to them as our own quite different customs are to us. Let that solemn strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the ancient preoccupation with fate and fortune. The ancient world was deeply preoccupied with fate and fortune, with the shape of things to come, and the hidden forces believed to govern human affairs, and it sought to read and influence these forces through a great variety of practices that we would regard as mere superstition. We shall wander through this gently, for it is among the more curious and harmless of the ancient preoccupations. The ancients believed profoundly in fate, in the idea that the course of a life and the shape of events were governed by forces beyond human control, and this belief shaped their whole understanding of their lives and fortunes. The notion that destiny governed human affairs, that the pattern of a life was in some sense fixed or foreordained, was deeply woven into the ancient worldview, giving rise to a whole preoccupation with discerning and, if possible, influencing the decrees of fate. This sense of life as governed by destiny, by forces larger than the individual will, colored the ancient understanding of fortune and misfortune, of success and failure, of the whole course of human existence. To live in the ancient world was to live under the shadow or the promise of fate. From this preoccupation flowed a great enthusiasm for the reading of signs and the prediction of the future. For the ancients believed that the shape of things to come could be discerned by those who knew how to read the signs, and they resorted to a great variety of methods to do so. We have touched already upon the reading of omens in birds and entrails and the consultation of oracles, but the ancient appetite for divination extended far beyond these, into a whole world of methods for discerning the future and the will of the gods. The ancients sought signs of what was to come in every corner of the world around them, reading meaning into occurrences of every kind, and important decisions might turn upon such readings. This constant reading of signs, this search for the shape of the future, was an ordinary part of ancient life, undertaken with the greatest seriousness. Among the most popular of these arts was astrology, the reading of the future and of character in the positions of the stars and planets, which enjoyed enormous prestige in the ancient world and was taken with great seriousness by people of every station. The belief that the heavenly bodies governed or foretold human affairs, that a person's fate and character were written in the stars at their birth, was widespread and influential, and astrologers were consulted on matters great and small. This art, which we regard as mere superstition, was in the ancient world a respected and serious business, believed to reveal genuine truths about fate and character, and consulted even by the powerful in the conduct of their affairs. The prestige of astrology in the ancient world reflects the depth of the ancient preoccupation with fate and the desire to discern it. All of this, the belief in fate, the reading of omens, the prestige of astrology, reflects a whole understanding of the world and of human life quite different from our own, one in which the course of events was governed by hidden forces that might be discerned by those with the skill to read the signs. To the ancient mind, this was not superstition but a serious engagement with the real forces that governed the world, an attempt to understand and navigate a universe shaped by fate and the will of the gods. This preoccupation with fate and fortune, so foreign to our own more mechanical understanding of the world, was among the defining features of the ancient mind, as normal to them as our own quite different assumptions are to us. Let that curious strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the ancient concern with beauty and the adornment of the body. The ancient concern with beauty and the adornment of the body, with cosmetics and grooming, and the pursuit of an admired appearance, followed customs that would strike us as curious and sometimes alarming, and forms another gentle realm of the strange in the classical world. We shall wander through this lightly, for it is among the more amusing of the ancient oddities. The ancients, like people of every age, cared greatly about their appearance, and pursued beauty and an admired appearance through a variety of cosmetics and treatments, some of which would strike us as strange, and others as genuinely alarming. The pursuit of beauty involved the use of various substances applied to the skin and hair and face, preparations intended to enhance the appearance according to the ideals of the age. Some of these preparations were harmless enough, but others involved substances that we now know to be harmful, applied in ignorance of their dangers in the pursuit of an admired appearance. The lengths to which the ancients would go in pursuit of beauty, and the dangerous substances they would sometimes employ, reflect the universal human concern with appearance pursued in a world that did not understand the hazards involved. Particularly striking were the ideals of beauty themselves, which differed in various ways from our own, and the practices undertaken to achieve them, which could be elaborate and sometimes extreme. The ancient ideals of beauty, of what made a face or a body admired, differed from our own in various particulars, and the practices of grooming and adornment undertaken to achieve these ideals reflected the tastes and assumptions of the age. What one age finds beautiful, another may find strange, and the ancient standards of beauty and the elaborate practices undertaken to meet them are a gentle instance of this larger truth. The pursuit of beauty is universal, but its particular forms and ideals are always the products of a particular time and place. The care of the hair and the management of appearance involved elaborate practices as well, for the ancients devoted considerable attention to their hair and grooming, with fashions and styles that changed over time and that were pursued with real dedication. Elaborate hairstyles, the management of facial hair, the various fashions of grooming, all occupied the attention of those who cared about their appearance, and the pursuit of the fashionable look could involve considerable effort and expense. These fashions and practices, like fashions in every age, reflected the tastes of the time and marked the status and aspirations of those who followed them. There was, too, the matter of adornment with jewelry and fine clothing, the display of wealth and status through the trappings of appearance, which was pursued with enthusiasm by those who could afford it. The wealthy displayed their status through fine garments and jewelry and the trappings of luxury, and the adornment of the body with the marks of wealth and status was an important part of ancient social life. All of this, the cosmetics and the grooming, the ideals of beauty and the practices to achieve them, the adornment and display, made up the ancient world's concern with beauty and appearance, as normal to them as our own quite different beauty practices are to us, and a gentle reminder of the universal human concern with how we appear to others. Let that light strangeness settle softly in the dark. We turn now to the ancient world of wealth and poverty, and the bonds between them. The ancient world was marked by great extremes of wealth and poverty, and by a distinctive system of bonds and obligations between the powerful and the humble that structured much of social life, an arrangement quite unlike our own and revealing of the assumptions of the classical age. We shall consider this gently, for it forms an important part of the fabric of ancient society. The gulf between the wealthy and the poor in the ancient world was vast, far greater than the divisions we know, with immense wealth concentrated in the hands of a small elite, while the great mass of people lived in poverty or near it. The ancient world was a society of extreme inequality, its riches held by a narrow class of the privileged, while the many lived with little, and this vast gulf between the few and the many was simply the accepted structure of society. The concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a small elite, and the poverty of the great majority, were regarded not as injustices to be remedied, but as the natural order of things, the settled structure of a world that did not aspire to equality. This extreme inequality was fundamental to the ancient social order. A distinctive feature of Roman society in particular was the system of patronage, the network of bonds and obligations that linked the powerful patron to his humbler clients, who depended upon his protection and support, and who owed him their service and loyalty in return. This relationship between patron and client was a central institution of Roman social life, binding the society together in a web of mutual obligation between the powerful and the humble. The client depended upon his patron for various forms of support and protection, and in return owed the patron his loyalty, his service, and his public support, attending upon him and enhancing his prestige. This system of patronage structured much of Roman social and political life, a network of personal bonds and obligations quite different from anything in our own more impersonal society. The daily life of the client involved regular attendance upon the patron, a round of duties and observances by which the humble maintained their relationship with the powerful and secured the benefits it brought. The client would call upon his patron regularly, paying his respects and offering his services, and in return receiving the support and protection that the relationship provided. This daily round of patronage, the attendance of clients upon patrons, was an ordinary feature of Roman life, a routine of obligation and dependence that structured the relations between the classes. It was a system that bound the society together, but it was also one that entrenched inequality and dependence, tying the humble to the powerful in bonds of obligation. The powerful, for their part, maintained their status in part through the display of their wealth and the size of their following, competing with one another in generosity and magnificence, and offering to the people at large the benefactions that maintained their standing. The great sought to display their wealth and secure their status through public generosity, providing entertainments and benefactions to the people, and maintaining large followings of clients and dependents. This competitive generosity of the powerful, the provision of public benefits as a means of maintaining status, was a characteristic feature of ancient public life, bound up with the whole system of patronage and status, and the display of wealth. All of this made up the distinctive ancient world of wealth and poverty and patronage, structured by assumptions about inequality and obligation quite different from our own, and yet, to the ancient world, simply the normal order of society. Let that reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the ancient worship of rulers as divine. Among the more striking of the ancient normalities was the practice of treating rulers as divine, of according to emperors and kings the honors and worship due to gods, a practice that would strike us as extraordinary, and that was, in the ancient world, an accepted feature of political and religious life. We shall consider this gently, for it is among the more fascinating of the ancient strangenesses. The idea that a ruler might be divine, or might become so, was not foreign to the ancient world, which did not draw so sharp a line between the human and the divine as we do, and which could accord to its greatest rulers honors that approached or reached the worship due to gods. In various forms across the ancient world, rulers were treated as divine or semi-divine beings, honored with the rites and reverence of religion, their power and greatness understood as partaking of the divine. This blurring of the line between the ruler and the god, so strange to us, flowed from a whole understanding of divinity and power, quite different from our own, one in which the greatest of human beings might cross, or seem to cross, the boundary into the divine. In the Roman world, this took the particular form of the worship of the emperors, who came to be regarded, especially after their deaths, as gods, and honored with temples and priests and the rites of divine worship. The Roman emperor became the object of a religious cult, worshipped as a divine being, with temples raised in his honor and rites performed in his name. And this imperial cult became an important feature of the religious and political life of the empire. The worship of the emperor served to bind the vast and various empire together in a common reverence, a shared cult that united the diverse peoples of the Roman world in the veneration of the imperial power. This treatment of the ruler as a god, so extraordinary to us, was an accepted and important part of the Roman order. Behind this practice lay a whole understanding of the relationship between power and divinity, quite different from our own, one that saw in the greatest earthly power a reflection or embodiment of the divine, and that found nothing strange in according to the ruler the honors of a god. The ancient world did not share our sharp distinction between the political and the religious, the human ruler and the divine power, and it could move easily between them, honoring the ruler with the rites of religion and understanding his power as partaking of the divine. This was not, to the ancient mind, the absurdity or blasphemy it might seem to us, but a natural expression of the greatness of the ruler and the divine quality of his power. The worship of rulers served real purposes as well, binding together the state and its peoples in a common reverence, expressing and reinforcing the power and legitimacy of the ruler, and providing a focus for the loyalty and unity of the realm. The cult of the ruler was not merely a strange superstition, but a political institution of real importance, serving to unify the state and to express and secure the authority of its head. In this it reflected the intertwining of religion and politics that was characteristic of the ancient world, the use of religious forms to serve political ends, and the understanding of political power as bound up with the divine. All of this made the worship of rulers so strange to us, a normal and important feature of ancient life, as accepted and unremarkable to the ancient world as it would be astonishing to our own. Let that strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now to another of the great passions of the ancient crowd, the fervour of the races. If the games of the arena were the most troubling of the ancient entertainments, the racing of chariots was among the most passionately beloved, a spectacle that roused the ancient crowds to a fervour and a devotion that would strike us as extraordinary, and that reveals much about the passions of the ancient world. We shall wander through this gently, for it is among the more colourful and less troubling of the ancient spectacles. The racing of chariots was among the most popular of all ancient entertainments, drawing enormous crowds to the great racing arenas, where they watched the swift and dangerous races with a passion and excitement that gripped the whole society. The chariot races were spectacles of speed and skill and danger, as teams of horses drew their chariots at great speed around the track, and the crowds followed the races with the most intense excitement and devotion. This was mass entertainment on a grand scale, drawing vast crowds and rousing them to a pitch of excitement, a central feature of the public life and popular culture of the ancient city. The great racing arenas were among the largest structures of the ancient world, built to hold the enormous crowds that the races drew. The devotion of the crowds to their favoured racing teams was intense, for the ancient racing was organised around competing factions or teams, and the people attached themselves to these with a passionate loyalty that could shape their whole identity and rouse them to great heights of feeling. The supporters of the different racing factions were devoted to their teams with a fervour that we might compare to the most passionate of modern sporting loyalties, and this devotion could become a powerful force, shaping identities and rivalries, and even, at times, spilling over into disorder and violence. The passion of the racing crowds was a remarkable phenomenon, a mass devotion that gripped the ancient cities and that could become a force of real social and even political significance. The charioteers themselves, the drivers who guided the racing teams, could become figures of enormous fame and adulation, celebrated heroes of the ancient crowd, showered with wealth and adulation, and known throughout the society. The most successful charioteers were among the great celebrities of the ancient world, famous and admired and richly rewarded, their names known to all and their victories celebrated by their devoted supporters. This adulation of the sporting hero, the fame and fortune showered upon the successful charioteer, reflects the intense popular passion for the races and the place of the sporting spectacle at the heart of ancient popular culture. The charioteer, like the modern sporting star, could rise from humble origins to fame and fortune through his prowess in the arena. The passion for the races reflects a whole world of popular entertainment and mass devotion, quite different from, and yet oddly similar to, our own. For in this at least, the ancient world was not so far from ours, with its passionate sporting loyalties and its celebrated heroes and its vast crowds roused to fervour by the spectacle. Here, perhaps more than anywhere, we may feel a kinship with the ancient crowd, recognising in their passion for the races something very like our own enthusiasms, a shared human delight in spectacle and competition and the glory of the contest. And yet the particular forms of the ancient racing, its factions and its fervour, its place in the life of the society, were the products of that particular world, as normal to them as our own quite different entertainments are to us. Let that colourful strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the masks and festivals of the ancient stage. Not all the entertainments of the ancient world were spectacles of combat or racing, for the Greeks and Romans also possessed a rich tradition of the theatre, of drama performed upon the stage, and this too followed customs that would strike us as curious and unfamiliar. We shall wander through this gently, for it is among the more admirable and less troubling of the ancient entertainments, and one whose influence upon our own world has been profound. The theatre of the ancient world, and especially of Greece, was bound up closely with religion and festival, for the great dramas were performed not as mere entertainment, but as part of religious celebrations, offered to the gods at sacred festivals, in an atmosphere quite unlike that of our own theatre-going. The performance of plays was a religious and civic occasion, part of the great festivals that punctuated the ancient year, and to attend the theatre was to participate in a communal and sacred event rather than simply to seek amusement. This binding of drama to religion and festival, so different from our own secular theatre, reflects the way the ancient world wove its entertainments into the fabric of its religious and communal life. The great dramatic festivals were among the most important occasions of the civic year, attended by great crowds and regarded with the utmost seriousness. The manner of ancient performance, too, was strange by our standards, for the actors wore masks that concealed their faces and represented the characters they played, and all the roles, including those of women, were performed by men. The ancient actor did not show his own face but performed behind a mask, which represented the character and projected the voice, and the whole cast was male, the female roles played by men behind their masks. This masked and all-male performance, so different from our own theatre, was simply the accepted manner of ancient drama, the natural way that plays were performed. The masks, the stylized performance, the great open-air theatres in which the dramas were staged before enormous audiences, all made the experience of ancient theatre quite different from our own. The plays themselves, the great tragedies and comedies of the ancient stage, were works of extraordinary power and artistry, exploring the deepest questions of human life and fate, and they remain among the greatest achievements of the ancient world, still performed and admired after more than 2,000 years. The ancient dramatists created works of profound insight and beauty, tragedies that probed the darkest reaches of human suffering and fate, comedies that mocked and delighted, and these works have endured as masterpieces of the human imagination. That such profound and enduring art should emerge from the religious festivals of the ancient world is a mark of the extraordinary creative achievement of the classical age, an achievement that stands among its greatest and most admirable. The festivals of which the theatre formed a part were themselves a remarkable feature of ancient life, for the ancient calendar was punctuated by a great many public festivals and holidays, occasions of celebration and religious observance that gave shape to the year and provided the people with regular respite from labour. The ancient year was rich in festivals, days of celebration and religious rite and public entertainment, which structured the passage of time and bound the community together in shared observance and celebration. These festivals, with their processions and sacrifices, their games and performances, their feasting and celebration, were central to ancient life, as normal and important to the ancient world as they would seem numerous and elaborate to us. The theatre and the festival together formed one of the brighter and more admirable aspects of the ancient world, a realm of art and celebration and shared communal joy. Let that brighter strangeness settle gently in the dark. We turn now to reflect upon the achievements that stood alongside the darkness of the ancient world. Having wandered through so many of the strange and troubling normalities of the ancient world, it is only right that we pause now to remember the other side of that world, the extraordinary achievements that stood alongside its darkness. For the same civilization that practiced the troubling customs we have explored also produced some of the greatest achievements of the human spirit. We shall reflect on this gently, for it is an important part of an honest understanding of the ancient world. For all its darkness, the ancient world produced achievements in thought and art and learning that stand among the greatest in all of human history, achievements that have shaped our own world profoundly and that we still admire and draw upon today. The philosophy of the Greeks, their inquiries into the nature of the world and the good life, laid foundations upon which much of later thought was built. Their art and architecture created works of enduring beauty that we still study and admire. Their literature and drama, their poetry and history, produced masterpieces that remain alive after more than 2,000 years. And the Romans, for their part, achieved marvels of engineering and law and administration that shaped the world for centuries. The achievements of the ancient world were genuine and immense, a flowering of the human spirit that we rightly celebrate. This is the great puzzle and paradox of the ancient world, that the same civilization could be capable of such achievement and such darkness together, could produce both the philosophy we admire and the cruelties we abhor, could reach such heights of the human spirit while resting upon such troubling foundations. The people who created the beauty and the wisdom of the ancient world were the same people who accepted its slavery and its cruelties, who saw no contradiction between their achievements and their darknesses. This combination, so difficult for us to reconcile, is one of the most important truths of the ancient world, and indeed of human history, that great achievement and great moral failure can exist together in the same people and the same society. We should not then either dismiss the ancient world for its darkness or excuse that darkness for the sake of its achievements, but hold both together in our understanding, seeing the ancient world whole, in all its greatness and all its terrible blindness. To see only the marble and the philosophy is to miss the slavery and the cruelty upon which they rested, but to see only the darkness is to miss the genuine and enduring achievements of the human spirit that the ancient world produced. The truth is that the ancient world was both gloriously accomplished and deeply flawed, and an honest understanding must hold both of these together, neither dismissing nor excusing, but seeing clearly. There is a lesson in this for our understanding of history and of humanity, a recognition that people and societies are complex, capable of both great good and great wrong, and that we must learn to see them in their fullness rather than in the simple terms of heroes and villains. The ancient world teaches us that achievement and cruelty, wisdom and blindness, beauty and darkness can coexist in the same civilization, and that understanding the past and the present requires us to hold these complexities together. It is a mature and difficult lesson, but an important one, and it flows naturally from an honest wandering through the strange and accomplished and troubling world of Greece and Rome. Let that thoughtful reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to reflect on why it all seemed so normal to those who lived it. We have called the customs we explored tonight strange and disturbing, and so they seem to us. But to those who lived among them, they seemed entirely normal. And it is worth pausing now to reflect on why, on how practices that strike us as troubling could seem, to those who practiced them, simply the ordinary way of things. This is a gentle and thoughtful question, and its answer illuminates much about human nature and history. The first and simplest reason is the sheer power of custom and familiarity, the way that whatever we grow up with comes to seem natural and normal, however strange it might appear to an outsider. The people of the ancient world were born into their customs, raised among them, surrounded by them all their lives, and so those customs seemed to them simply the way the world was, the natural and obvious order of things. We are all shaped in this way by the world we are born into, absorbing its assumptions so deeply that we scarcely notice them, taking for granted what would astonish an outsider. The ancients accepted their world's arrangements for the same reason we accept our own, because they were the familiar furniture of the only world they knew. A second reason is the absence in the ancient world of the ideas and principles by which we now judge such practices to be wrong. for many of the moral convictions we hold most deeply had not yet been developed or come to prevail. The idea of the fundamental equality and dignity of all human beings, so central to our own moral thinking, was not the assumption of the ancient world, and without it, practices that we condemn on its basis did not appear wrong in the same way. The moral principles by which we judge the ancient world were, in many cases, not available to that world, which operated by a different moral framework, and which therefore did not see its practices as we see them. This is not to say there was no moral thought in the ancient world, for there was a great deal, but that it proceeded from different assumptions and reached different conclusions. A third reason lies in the hard circumstances of ancient life, the conditions of scarcity and danger and struggle that shaped the ancient world and made certain harsh practices seem necessary or unavoidable. In a world of high mortality and limited resources, of constant war and precarious survival, attitudes and practices took shape that might not have arisen in easier circumstances, hardened by the harsh realities of ancient existence. This does not excuse the genuine wrongs of the ancient world, but it helps to explain how they could seem, to those who lived amid such hardship, to be sorrowful necessities rather than avoidable cruelties. The circumstances of ancient life were hard, and that hardness shaped the assumptions and practices of the age. Understanding all this does not require us to approve of the troubling practices of the ancient world, but it does allow us to understand them, to see how they could seem normal to those who lived among them, and to approach them with understanding rather than mere horror. And it carries a gentle warning for ourselves, a reminder that we too are shaped by our age and its assumptions, that we too take for granted things that may seem, to those who come after us, as strange and troubling as the customs of the ancients seem to us. This humility, this recognition of our own embeddedness in our time, is among the gentlest and most valuable lessons of our wander through the ancient world. Let that thoughtful reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to reflect on the comfort of how far we have come. Having wandered through so many of the troubling normalities of the ancient world, we may find ourselves looking with new eyes upon our own age and feeling a quiet gratitude for the moral progress that separates us from the ancient world, for the changes that have made so many of its normalities unthinkable to us. We shall reflect on this gently, for it is a comforting thought to carry towards sleep. For all the imperfections of our own age, and they are many, it is worth pausing to recognize how far the world has come from the assumptions of the ancient past. How many of the practices we have explored tonight have been abolished or come to be seen as the wrongs they were. The slavery that the ancient world accepted as natural has been, at least in its old forms, abolished and condemned. The cruelty of the arena would be unthinkable as public entertainment today. The exposure of infants, the harsh subjugation of women, the casual acceptance of conquest and its cruelties, all of these have been, if not perfected away, at least transformed and condemned in ways that mark a real moral progress. We have not made a perfect world, but we have left behind much of the darkness that the ancient world accepted without question. This progress is worth remembering, for it is easy to grow cynical about our own age, and to forget how much has genuinely improved, how many ancient cruelties have been abolished, how much more widely the dignity of the human person is now recognized. The idea that all human beings possess a fundamental equality and dignity, so foreign to the ancient world, has become, however imperfectly realized, a governing principle of our moral thinking. The protections we extend to the vulnerable, the rights we recognize in all persons, the limits we place upon cruelty and power, all represent real gains, real progress from the assumptions of the ancient world. As you lie there in the comfort and safety of your own life, it is worth recognizing that you live in a world that has, in these respects at least, come a very long way from the one we have explored tonight. And yet this progress should breed not complacency but a continued striving, for the work of moral progress is never finished, and our own age has its own blindnesses and cruelties that future ages may condemn as we condemn those of the ancients. The recognition of how far we have come should inspire us to continue the work of moral progress, to seek out and remedy the wrongs of our own age, mindful that we too are shaped by our assumptions and blind to some of our own failings. The lesson of the ancient world is not that we have arrived at moral perfection, but that moral progress is real and possible, and that the work of extending dignity and justice and compassion is a continuing one, never complete. There is in all this a deep and quiet comfort, a recognition that the human story, for all its darkness, has also been a story of moral growth, of the gradual extension of dignity and compassion, of the slow leaving behind of ancient cruelties. As you drift toward sleep tonight, you may take comfort in this, in the knowledge that the world has come a long way from the troubling normalities we have explored, and that you live in an age that, for all its faults, has left much of that darkness behind. It is a comforting thought and a fitting one to carry into the quiet of the night, this sense of the long moral journey of humanity and of how far, in so many ways, we have come. Let that comforting reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the ordinary human beings at the heart of all we have explored. As we near the end of our long journey through the strange old world, let us turn from the customs and practices we have explored to the ordinary human beings who lived among them, the real people of the ancient world, as human as ourselves, who lived their lives within the assumptions of their age as we live within ours. For behind every strange custom and troubling normality were living people, and it is in remembering them as people that we find the deepest understanding of our journey. Think of the ordinary people of the ancient world, going about their daily lives amid the customs we have explored, the parents raising their children, the workers at their labours, the friends gathering to talk and eat and drink, living lives full of the ordinary joys and sorrows and concerns that fill human lives in every age. Beneath all the strangeness of their world, these were people much like us, who loved their families and worried about their livelihoods, who enjoyed the company of friends and the pleasures of life, who feared and hoped and dreamed as people always have. The strangeness of their customs should not blind us to the fundamental humanity of the people who practiced them, ordinary human beings living their lives as best they could in the world they were given. Think, too, of how these people were shaped by their world, absorbing its assumptions and living by its customs, not because they were wicked, but because these were the only assumptions and customs they knew, the natural and obvious way of things in the only world they had ever known. They accepted the troubling normalities of their age for the same reason we accept our own, because they were born into them and raised among them and surrounded by them all their lives. Had we been born into their world, we would very likely have accepted its assumptions as they did, seeing nothing strange in what strikes us now as troubling. This is a humbling thought, and an important one, for it reminds us that the difference between us and the ancients is not that we are better people, but that we have inherited a different and, in many ways, a better set of assumptions. Think, too, of the ways in which these ancient people were capable of the same goodness and kindness and love that we admire in our own world, for the darkness of their customs existed alongside real virtue and real humanity, and the ancient world knew love and friendship and kindness and courage, as every age has. The same world that accepted such troubling practices also produced acts of great nobility and love, friendships of deep devotion, parents who cherished their children, people who lived with virtue and died with honor. The humanity of the ancient world was not all darkness, but a mixture of light and shadow, of virtue and cruelty, of the admirable and the troubling, much as our own world is. In this too they were like us, complex and various, capable of both good and ill. In remembering the people of the ancient world in this way, we move beyond the mere cataloguing of strange customs to a deeper and more sympathetic understanding, seeing in the ancients not alien beings but fellow human beings, separated from us by the vast gulf of time and changed assumptions, yet sharing with us the fundamental humanity that binds all people across all ages. They lived and loved and struggled and died within the assumptions of their age, as we do within ours. And they were, beneath all the strangeness, people much like us. It is right that we remember them so, with understanding and sympathy rather than mere judgment, recognizing across the great gulf of time our shared and common humanity. Let that human recognition settle gently in the dark. We turn now to our final gentle thought, the thread that connects us to them across the centuries. As our long journey through the ancient world draws toward its close, let us hold one final gentle thought, a thought that reaches across all the vast gulf of years between the ancient world and our own, and finds, in the end, a deep and human connection. For all the strangeness of their customs and the darkness of some of their ways, the people of Greece and Rome were part of the same long human story of which we are part, and in contemplating their world we are contemplating something of our own origins and our own humanity. We are connected to the ancient world in countless ways, for our own civilization grew in large part from theirs, inheriting their languages and laws, their ideas and arts, their ways of thinking and understanding the world. Much of what we are, much of how we think and speak and organize our world, descends from the ancient world we have explored tonight, so that the ancients are not merely strangers to us but ancestors, whose world gave rise to our own. The philosophy and the law, the literature and the art, the very categories of our thought, bear the deep imprint of the classical world, connecting us to it across the centuries in ways we scarcely notice. We are, in a real sense, the heirs of the ancient world, carrying forward what it began, and we are connected to them too by the deeper thread of our shared humanity. For the people of the ancient world, however different their customs, were human beings like us, who shared the fundamental experiences and emotions that bind all people across all ages. They knew love and loss, hope and fear, joy and sorrow as we do. They raised their children and mourned their dead, sought happiness and meaning, struggled with the difficulties of life, as people always have. Beneath all the differences of custom and assumption, this common humanity connects us to them, a thread that runs across the vast gulf of time and binds us to the people of the ancient world as to all the generations of humanity. In contemplating them, we contemplate ourselves and the long human story of which we are all a part. There is something steadying and gentle in this thought, this sense of connection across the centuries to the people who lived so long ago in that strange and distant world. They are gone now, every one of them, the philosophers and the emperors, the ordinary people going about their lives, the whole vast population of the ancient world, gone into the deep, past these 2,000 years and more. Their world vanished, their voices silent, all of them long since at rest. But they were here, they lived, they built a world of great achievement and great darkness. They were part of the long human story that continues in us, and we are connected to them by the unbroken thread of that story, the long procession of humanity of which they and we are part. And so we can let them rest now, the people of the ancient world, with a kind of tenderness and understanding, a recognition of our shared humanity across the vast gulf of time. Their world was strange and often troubling, and we would not wish to return to it. But it was a human world, made by human beings like ourselves, and it gave rise to our own. Let that gentle sense of connection settle over you now, soft and calming in the dark, as we prepare at last to let the whole long story go and drift away into sleep. Let it carry you gently toward rest, this thought of the long human family of which you are a part, stretching back across the centuries to the ancient shores of the Mediterranean and far, far beyond. We turn now, at last, towards sleep. So let it all go now, gently, the whole long world we have wandered through tonight, the entire strange and distant world of ancient Greece and Rome. Let it fade, the way the past fades, the way the centuries dissolve into a soft and shapeless distance, the marble temples and the crowded cities, the philosophers and the emperors, the strange customs and the troubling normalities, all growing dim and quiet and far away, until there is only the soft dark, and your own slow breathing, and the gathering tide of sleep. Let the ancient world grow quiet and distant now. Let the temples fall silent, the crowds disperse, the great cities settle into the deep stillness of the vanished past. Let the whole strange world we have explored, all its brightness and all its darkness, drift gently away into the depths of time. All of it long over now, all of it long at rest, 2,000 years and more, into the silence of the past. They are gone now, every one of them, the whole vast population of that ancient world, their lives long since ended, their world long since vanished, generation upon generation at rest in the deep past, and there is a great soft quiet where all their striving once was. Let them rest, gently, in the peace of the long-vanished centuries. And now, at last, so may you. Feel the warmth and comfort of your bed, soft and safe around you. Feel how far you are from all that ancient strangeness, how safe, how comfortable, how gently held by the quiet of your own night. There is nothing you need to carry from all we have explored, nothing to trouble you, no strangeness to disturb the calm of your rest, only the soft dark and the deep quiet and the simple comfort of your own warm bed, 2,000 years and more away from all that we have touched upon tonight. Feel your breathing slow, and your body soften, and the small cares of the day loosen their grip, one by one, and drift away into the warm dark, until there is only you, and the quiet, and the deepening peace. And feel, perhaps, a quiet gratitude as you lie there, safe and comfortable, for the gentle world you inhabit, so far removed from the harshness of that ancient time, for the long journey of humanity that has carried us so far from the troubling normalities of the past. You are safe, and you are comfortable, and you are free simply to rest, in a world that has left behind so much of the darkness we have explored tonight. There is nothing to fear and nothing to trouble you, only the soft surrender to sleep, the gentle sinking down into the warm and shapeless dark, where all is quiet and peaceful and well. The whole long story we have travelled, the whole strange world of Greece and Rome, can simply be set down now and released, dissolving into the soft dark, leaving you weightless and at peace, drifting gently down into sleep. And if any last image still lingers at the edge of your thoughts, some sunlit temple, some crowded ancient street, some philosopher deep in thought beneath the Mediterranean sky, let it grow soft now, and slow, and distant, the way a dream dissolves as you slip past its edge into sleep, the images dimming, the world fading, the whole ancient world dissolving quietly into the warm and shapeless dark. You can simply let it drift away, like the day itself, like the centuries themselves, out into the quiet and gone. Good night, traveller. The ancient world is long vanished now, all its strangeness long since passed into the silence of the deep past, all its people long at rest across the great gulf of the centuries, and you are safe and warm and well, here in the gentle quiet of your own night, 2,000 years and more away. Rest easy, sleep deep. I'll be here, somewhere in the quiet, when you wake.